Hello, and welcome to an all new episode of the Transfix Take podcast, where each week we deliver news, insights, and trends for shippers and carriers. It's the week of March 20th. I'm Jenny Ruiz, and of course, I'm joined by our market expert, none other than Justin Mays. Mays, how's it going?
It's going great this week, Jenny. Not too much rumblings out there, so it's going smooth.
All right, good. We did have a bit of a weird winter weather issue last week. It didn't let up despite the first day of spring being today as we record. And we may even see 1 to 2 more major snowstorms in the next 7 days. Fingers crossed that we don't. But here are the week's top 5 worst weather lanes powered by Weather Optics. We have Denver to Chicago, which is the worst for drivers with a 10 out of 10 risk score. Kansas City to Chicago, which is the worst of the 5 with a 66% maximum shipment delay. Chicago to Detroit, Minneapolis to Chicago, and Columbus to Rochester. Now, Scott Pecorello, who's the CEO of Weather Optics, advises that drivers headed in and out of the Chicago to Denver lane should consider taking I-70 if you can, instead of I-80 to lower those risks and delays. Now, Mays, you spoke about these markets during Fast Freight Friday heading into the weekend last week. Were there any other notables or surprises that we're recovering from this week?
I would say there's been no major surprises, as you called out. Like, there's just been delays. And these are delays that I'm sure shippers and receivers have also expected. So no major call-outs. It was really, the Denver metro area was heavily impacted, and parts of the Midwest and Northeast due to heavy storms. But, also down here in Atlanta, it's been quite cold this week. But hopefully there's not 2 more snowstorms and we get back into the spring weather.
I'm not smiling because I'm wishing that on Atlanta. I just want to make that clear because I realized as you said it, I started to smile. But that said, you know what? It's time for the regional breakdown. Good news for drivers. We are still seeing the national rate per mile increase. But Mays, talk us through what rates look like right now, and have tender rejections gotten some gains since the last time we spoke?
So rates have continued to increase at a national average level. They went from $1.62 the last time we spoke up to $1.66. We're seeing the increase actually pick up some momentum. That's heavily due to the highest volume lanes for the most part, other than the Northeast, seeing the increases. That's Atlanta, that's Miami, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and then the bigger markets out in the West Coast, Ontario and Los Angeles, they're all seeing increases. So it's going to be dragging up that national average. But you still have some major markets up in the Northeast and parts of the Midwest that are a mixed feeling. But overall, rates are continuing their upward momentum. But on tender rejections, we're not seeing just yet the same. They're really sitting flat. We've seen a very slim increase, but still sitting around 3.5% for dry van.
Okay, well, this week we've got a pretty even split, as you hinted, when it comes to regions experiencing that upward pressure and those that are feeling downward pressure. But why don't we start with the South? We're seeing about 1.15% overall increase in rates here, but what's the story?
Yeah, Jenny, the South is continuing to pick up momentum, and I don't think we could just say produce season anymore. Produce season's in the very early stages, really just the bottom half of Texas, but you're seeing it along not just the Texas border, but also the Arizona border and California border. I'm going to say it has to do with imports that are going into Mexico right now. It's driving more truckload volume going into the U.S. from Mexico. Mexican imports from China are up significantly year over year and in history. So I think that's going to continue to drive that momentum. It's just how long will that last? Is it going to last until we see produce season, which really doesn't kick into gear in the states like Arizona for another 2 months?
Yeah. We'll certainly be watching that. But speaking of watching, the Southeast is starting to get tighter over the last 3 weeks, pretty much holding strong since Valentine's Day with a couple of dips in between. Long hauls and cross-country freight have seen the biggest gains due to increased produce volume in this area. But what are we seeing this week?
Yeah, you're spot on. The Miami market, all the spring breakers down there, the drivers are not necessarily looking to stay there. If they're staying within the Southeast, they're still able to drive some revenue into their equipment. The longer the haul, though, what we're seeing is freight going back to the West and the South are actually costing more. That's one call out I will make is freight coming from a hotter market, going to a hotter market. We're still seeing the rates increase, not necessarily decline. Okay. But also rates going up to the Midwest and Northeast and the Southeast are definitely way less desirable because you're going into a market that is less desirable for the carrier. So that's also driving up rates.
Oh, man. Amen. Now, the West Coast has definitely made a flip over the last 14 days, now seeing almost a 1% increase in rates as they continue to recover from those storms in Colorado and other areas. What's in store for the West Coast this week?
So this is where I'm keeping an eye because, like I said, we're seeing the largest markets on the West Coast, whether it's Phoenix, Ontario, Los Angeles,
Yeah.
see that momentum that we haven't seen until the last couple of weeks throughout the last 6 months. There's something to keep an eye on here because I do think, like I said, it's imports coming through Mexico to the U.S. I don't think we're going to see this tightening last too much longer. I think we're going to see it, continue its momentum for the next week or so, but then die down until we get into the real produce season out in parts of Southern California and Arizona.
Yeah, these first couple of weeks of March kind of feel like an indication of what real produce season will look like for a lot of these regions. But now that we're getting into sort of the looser regions, starting with the coastal region, shippers still have control over most of these markets, but there are a few call-outs where carriers have buying power. Maze, tell us more.
Yeah, it's going to be the more southern markets in the coastal region, so really South Carolina, even parts of North Carolina. It really has to do with that domino effect of the Southeast overall tightening up. The markets getting closer to the Northeast are really reacting as if they are Northeastern markets, and they're continuing to soften. That's like Baltimore, Alexandria, Virginia. Those markets continue to soften, whereas Charleston, Greenville, even Wilmington, North Carolina continue to see some tightening. Nothing too dramatic on either side. The coastal is really just remaining somewhat flat at an aggregate level.
Yeah, you'd mentioned North Carolina and South Carolina were the ones to watch over the month, so no surprise there. But as you mentioned, the Northeast, this region continues to take a dip. In just 30 days, we've seen a 7% overall decrease in rates here, with just the Albany market perhaps seeing slight gains. And I feel like the story is going to continue to be the same with the Northeast. But tell me if I'm wrong, what can we expect here?
No, you're 100% right. It's traditional seasonality coming out of the Northeast. We've seen the most momentum downward continue in the Northeast. Every market except the one you called out, Albany, saw week-over-week decreases. We're going to see this continue over the next couple weeks, if not months, until we hit our bottoming up in the Northeast. It's just a less desirable region to haul out of if you're going into the spring months.
Okay. Let's close out with the Midwest in our trifecta of loose markets. Now, this one is interesting, right? So over 30 days, we've seen a near 8% dip overall. But when you zoom out into the last 60 days, this region dipped nearly 11%. What's going on with the Midwest this week, and will we see a flip before the end of this month?
So I don't think we'll see a flip. We're just going to continue to see that downward pressure lose momentum. And that's why if I go back to the Northeast still has room to go. That's why we're not going to see the downward pressure just yet lose its momentum. But in the Midwest, we're definitely seeing that. It really depends on where the freight's going, though. If the freight is going to the West Coast, if it's going down south, we're going to see heavily favored shippers because they know carriers are going to get higher rates leaving those regions. But, it kind of shows that we are heading towards the bottoming of the Midwest in the next, let's say, 60 to 90 days. So it's definitely an area to keep an eye on because specific lanes are definitely going to see momentum one way or the other in the carrier or shipper's favor.
Okay, well, March has definitely been the start of what we anticipate to be the beginning of the market flip. But what can we expect on next week's show as we close out the month, Maze? Or am I entirely wrong? Because I feel like there's something here that you're burning to tell me.
No, I think you're right. I think we're starting to see signs of pressure being applied on the market. I think this momentum will continue over the next 2 to 3 weeks as we leave the month of March and Q1.
Okay.
But I think in the beginning of Q2, we will see slight downward pressure nationally again, but gearing right back up as we get into the middle of produce season, where we'll really see the market firm up for the remainder of 2024.
All right, and we'll see where we netted out next week on the predictions that we set at the top of the month, which feels like we just did it yesterday, but here we are yet again in another month. Now, if you want to get into the specifics of what the next 6 months will bring, I'll be hosting a webinar with our chief economist, Paul Pojemski, next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to go over all the details you need to know to stay ahead of the curve, and there are quite a lot, so I'm warning you, you should be taking notes on this. You can reserve your seat by clicking on the link in our newsletter. With that, we will see you next week with an all-new episode of the Transfix Take podcast. Drive safely.